The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Box Score, talking vintage sports from the Garden at Nedick's on 49th Street. I'm Ralph Tycho, and Hal Bock is here. Hal, would you be kind enough to introduce the panel?
Well, we have a distinguished panel. We have Al Blumpkin.
Thank you.
George Case III.
Thanks, Hal.
David Hubler.
Hello, thank you.
And I'm here.
Well, thank you all for being here. Sad circumstances. Alan, you mentioned off the air to us the passing of JoJo White, great Boston Celtics guard.
Now, he was elected to the Basketball Hall of Fame 2015.
Yeah, very sad.
They said that on the radio. I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, you know, I'd mentioned it, Alan, when you mentioned that a few minutes ago. When I was in the athletic footwear business, JoJo White was one of the NBA players that wore our shoes, and I had a chance to meet JoJo, and I really didn't have any idea he was even sick, so it really affects me when I just heard of his passing from, I believe you said it was cancer.
Yeah, that's what they said on the radio.
He was a great player.
What kind of cancer it was.
Yeah, he was a great player with those Celtics teams, and I had a chance to really meet him at one point, and I'm sorry to hear about that.
Yeah, so is everybody who knows a little bit about the history of the NBA and particularly the Celtics.
Right.
Yeah. Very sad. Condolences to his family and all of his friends. So, on a more pleasant note, Hal, would you talk about the column that you wrote that we're going to discuss on the hiring of Jon Gruden back with the Raiders?
Yeah, I wrote about Jon Gruden this week. I was fascinated by the fact that Gruden has been in the broadcast booth for ESPN for about 9 years now, and it seemed like he would never come back to coaching because he had a really comfortable gig, and ESPN people loved him, and he loved them, and it seemed like he would stay there for life. But along came the Raiders with an offer, a phenomenal offer for a coach, $10 million a year for 10 years. My math makes that a $100 million contract. And as I wrote in my column, he couldn't turn that down, neither could you. If somebody came along and offered you that kind of money to do whatever they wanted you to do. And so he returns to the Raiders. He had been there for 4 years, then was traded in one of Al Davis's maneuvers. Davis traded him to the Tampa Bay Bucks, and he got in return a bundle. He got 2 number 1 draft choices, first rounders, 2 number 2 draft choices, second rounders, and $8 million, which is a pretty good haul for a coach, to give away your coach. But the irony of that was that in his first year with Tampa Bay, Gruden took them to the Super Bowl. And who did he find on the other side of the field but the Oakland Raiders? And he beat the tar out of them. Tampa won that game, I think, 48-24. I mean, it was a blowout. So after that, he was very ordinary with Tampa Bay, barely over 500 in 6 more years, and then left for the broadcast world. And so it was kind of surprising to me. There have been rumors about him returning and teams making overtures to him, but he's always turned them down. And it was kind of surprising to me that this would happen, that the Raiders would decide to invest that kind of money in a guy who's been more or less away from the game for that period of time. So that's what I wrote about this week.
Hal, I wanted to just mention that I appreciate. I read your column, and with Jon Gruden, I enjoyed watching him. I'm not a football guy, but I enjoyed watching him on ESPN. I mean, he's extremely knowledgeable, and I think he's also come up with a couple of commercials I've seen. But to make that kind of money, I guess it's really hard to turn it down. I believe his brother, Jay Gruden, is coach of the Redskins. So there you have a brother combination, both in the NFL. I'm not sure that the Redskins and the Raiders play against each other, but it'll be interesting to note that they're both in the coaching ranks in the National Football League.
Well, a few years ago, you had the Harbaugh Super Bowl with the Ravens with John Harbaugh and the 49ers with Jim Harbaugh. So it's not
right. That's exactly right, Alan. Yep.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that Harbaugh is a good bet to come back into the NFL?
Not unless there's an offer that he can't, an offer they can't refuse.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
he's making a huge amount of money. The college
a lot of college
today,
jobs are more secure than the NFL jobs.
Right. Yeah.
But
it used to be
college jobs is you're always recruiting. You're always going out to wine and dine 17-year-old kids, and that could become pretty old after a while. I would think. I mean, I'm not a coach, and I've never had to do that, but it just seems to me that being a pro coach, you're dealing with adults. You're dealing with adult men. And college coach, not only that, but college coaching, you have a turnover every year of players who, we'd like to say graduate, but many of them don't graduate. They move on to the NFL. But so I would think that given the right circumstance, you could lure any college coach into the pros because of those issues that, you get tired of chasing after kids, I would think. I don't know. Maybe they don't.
Yeah, wasn't there a coach out there at either USC or at UCLA who was lured into the NFL and he gave it up after a couple of years and went right back to college coaching? I can't remember who that was, but it sounds, I do remember that occurring. And I guess part of it was the fact that he just preferred the college game and a little bit less of the activities that went on in the NFL.
Yeah, the guy who coached, his name was John Robinson.
Then he went back into college coaching.
Yeah, he went back to USC after a couple of years. That's quite a while ago.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, college coaches, when I was in the athletic footwear business, we used to always laugh about it because college coaches back then were actually making more money than they would in the NFL. I mean, it's obviously turned around today, but I can remember a conversation about Joe Paterno. All those great years he had at Penn State, the NFL tried to lure him to the NFL, and he was actually making a better living and really enjoyed the college life better than he would have in the NFL.
Steve Spurrier was another. There's a few examples. Lou Holtz, Steve Spurrier. There are several that were successful college coaches, went into the NFL, for one reason or another couldn't succeed, and they went back to college. And then, of course, you have Charlie Weiss, who was one of Belichick's assistants early, a number of years ago, and he managed to get himself big contracts from both Notre Dame and Kansas and get fired from both of them. And, they name an award after him for the coach getting paid the most money for not coaching.
Lou Holtz was another guy who coached successfully in college.
Yeah, I mentioned him. Yeah, he coached the Jets for not even a full season.
Right.
And, he tried to do the rah-rah college stuff with them, and it didn't work spectacularly, and he left with, I think, a few games left in the season he was there.
Let me run something else by you guys, and I'm interested in your thoughts about it. Now, it became obvious that the Raiders were going to hire Jon Gruden at the end of the season, and he's doing the playoffs. He was doing the playoffs for ESPN, and he was assigned to the Kansas City Chiefs game in the first round of the playoffs. Now, the Kansas City Chiefs play in the AFC West, and the Oakland Raiders play in the AFC West. Do you think it was appropriate for Gruden to be doing that game? I mean, I can just imagine that he's taking a lot of notes about player tendencies and so forth, which he'll use when they play each other. So I'm not sure that was appropriate for him to commentate on that game. But the same thing happened when he was traded by the Raiders to the Tampa Bay Bucks, and who shows up in the Super Bowl but the Raiders? Well, he knew the Raiders inside and out. He knew that the players, he knew what they did, and turned out to be a rout for Tampa Bay. So I just wonder about that. I don't know.
That was an interesting game. Gannon was the quarterback, if I'm not mistaken, and there was some penalty issue. There was a penalty issue with in that game. I can only call on Al Blumpkin if you remember that. No,
I just remember like how it was very, very. I think the Raiders were actually favored. You know, and Tampa Bay just beat the living daylights out of them.
You know, with all the tapes and replays and things that are available to the coaches and the scouts, I probably couldn't have made that much difference if he'd been assigned to another game, because he could have gotten all of this information and recordings to see after the game.
Yeah, and they get all these films anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine.
There's no question that he will. But I'm just saying that it just seemed like kind of a bad idea to have him sitting in the press box taking notes.
It was bad for the fan. Is the fan going to get any real clarity from him about that specific game? Or are they going to get insights?
I mean, he, as George pointed out, he's a terrific analyst. That's why ESPN kept him around for 9 years. But so that part of it was certainly okay. But I'm just saying, I think it's a conflict a conflict of sorts for him to be in the press box watching a team that his new team will be playing twice next season.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to listen to that play-by-play again to see if, what his comments were. Were they denigratory, or did they, when it came time to assess individual plays, how did he refer? Some of these ex-quarterbacks love to take apart every play in the game and say what they would do rather than what had been done on the field. So I'm just wondering whether any of that came into play. We don't know, of course.
I don't know, David. You bring up a good point. I don't know either. And how do you know? I mean, was ESPN told that he had accepted the coaching job? I don't even know.
Yeah, it was an open secret. I mean, the guy he worked with mentioned it before the game started. So I mean, everybody knew that this was happening.
Okay. I didn't watch the broadcast. Yeah.
No, I have to pass on this because I don't pay attention to what they say anyway. I've learned over the years to tune them out as much as I possibly can.
Well, I'm wondering, ESPN has had a lot of house cleaning over the last couple of years. They've got rid of a lot of people up there in Connecticut.
Well, Herman Edwards was there forever.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering whether that was a factor in Gruden's decision. I mean, I know the money was astronomical, but I'm just wondering whether he sort of put out some feelers that if the price was right, you've got me kind of thing.
There's a couple of other angles to this story that I want to point out. One is that after he was shipped out from Oakland, the Raiders went through 9 other coaches in like 10 years. I mean, they just had a revolving door of coaches. So they couldn't find the right guy. Then they hired a guy named Jack Del Rio, who used to be a linebacker in the NFL. And 2 years ago, Del Rio had the team 12-4 and in the playoffs. And they were all excited about how good he had done, what a great job he had done. And they gave him a 4-year extension. And now this season, with injuries and everything else, the Raiders went 6-10, and all of a sudden Gruden was no good. I mean, Del Rio was no good anymore, and out the door. So I mean, that's the way of life in the NFL. It's what
it is how it is now. They have to. The Raiders have to pay. They have to pay him Del Rio for the remaining years of his contract on top of what they have to pay Gruden, right? So I mean that's a pretty hefty number.
Well, which suggests that they're not losing any money, you know.
Right.
Well, there's also another factor is that the Raiders are lame duck in Oakland,
right?
And they're about to move to Vegas when a stadium is complete. They've broken ground on the stadium, but we're talking 3 or 4 years still here in Oakland. I think part of it might have been to rejuvenate.
That's a very good point,
fans.
Yeah, well, you're up in that area. What's the feeling among Raiders fans up there? Are they still supporting the team, or are they?
Well, Raider fans are about as loyal a fan base as any group of fans in the country, any sport. Remember, they already lost the team once to L.A. and paid to get them back, changed the whole stadium, made a decent enough baseball stadium with a beautiful view. They put up a big wall and what have you and enclosed it, made it horrible for baseball. And then the Raiders turn around and move again. If one day they should just nobody show up at a ball game. I mean, if I'm the fans, I'd say we got to organize to just show them that we have some self-respect. And I mean, it costs $200-300 to go to a ball game anymore. These fans have been giving them money for 10 years since they returned, let alone before. So anything the Raider fan does has no basis in logic, in answer to your question, David.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's the way the NFL plays it. I mean, I've always felt that the NFL really just has no interest in what the fans think one way or another. They could play those games in an airline hangar. As long as they get their TV revenue and their ad revenue, they're fine.
Look at what they did this past weekend. They had a playoff game scheduled in Minnesota, so you're assuming to accommodate the fans, they would put the Saturday night game in Minnesota and the game in New England during the daytime. I mean, they did the same the week before, and they put the night game in Green Bay, the Saturday night game in Green Bay.
Oh.
And the only thing they give a damn about is the ratings.
Ratings,
If New England Patriot games get bigger ratings than any other game, they'll put them in what they think is the prime time.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I said that's my old airline theory.
Right. I'll tell you this. I don't watch NFL games. I try not to watch NFL. I'll peek in to see what the score is or something like that. But I don't watch NFL games. You know why I don't watch NFL games? Go look at the movie Concussion. Go look at the movie Concussion and recognize the damage that's being done to these individuals who are on the field with the brain damage and take a look at Tony Dorsett, one of my favorite players from the early part of the 80s and 90s. What a great running back he was. He doesn't know where he is now. He can't go to the store by himself.
Right.
Look at Jim McMahon, the same story. Look at Jim Plunkett. These are guys living out their lives in horrible physical condition because of what happened to them on the field.
Yeah, Sam Huff is another example of that.
There's a good example. That's right. One of my heroes, Sam Huff.
I didn't know he was suffering because if you guys will believe it or not, Sam Huff is the reason for this station, for everything involved with it. When I was 10, I found out Sam Huff was living in Flushing in the off season or during the season, and I'm a 10-year-old kid. I called him up. He had a listed number, and I said, "Is this Mr. Huff with the Giants?" "Oh, yes, it is." Something like that.
Yeah, it was West Virginia. Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to him as a fan, as a kid. He was very, very nice. He was a gentle person, and it gave me the idea that all you have to do is call and ask. Not just for interviews, you have to ask for what you want in life. It just set the tone, and I called a bunch of people over the years just to chat, and Leonard Coppett was one when he moved out. He moved out to California, and it was in the days where there was no internet, you couldn't get games, you couldn't follow other teams. About 1978 or so, and I called him up one day. I knew, and I said, "Mr. Coppett, I was a big fan of the Post growing up. You and Leonard Schechter had back-to-back columns, and would you mind answering a few questions for me?" And I don't remember what the questions were, but he too was kind and giving and understanding, as are all of you guys when I asked you if you wouldn't come on the show. So it's a matter of communication, and Sam Huff had it, and if he's in any way impaired now, I'm greatly saddened by that.
You know, for many years he was a terrific color guy with the Redskins. He and Sonny Jurgensen, and I forget who did the actual play-by-play, but the three of them were terrific. And most people, and I shouldn't say most people, but many people in the D.C. area would turn off the sound on the TV Redskins game to listen to those guys on the radio, because they knew so much more than the announcers on the TV telecast. So they were just, the three of them would just really hit the mark. They were just great every week. And yeah, I learned a while back that he was suffering from some form of dementia and was in really bad shape.
Yeah, and to say it didn't come from repeated hits on the football field is ludicrous. As if to say Muhammad Ali's Parkinson syndrome, quote unquote, wasn't caused by getting the crap beat out of each other, fighters back and forth. So, I see your point. With me, Hal, it was when I started to see around the time Stingley was hurt by Tatum, as a matter of fact, with the Raiders. Mm-hmm. And I started to see that they always had these ambulances right backed up to the sidelines. They used to have them
yes,
as if you got to get to them lickety split. And more and more times they were coming out, and players would lie there for a while. It was almost drama. Oh, he's moving his left leg a little bit. Don't we feel good about that? That kind of thing. Well, I feel you, Hal. I know what you're talking about.
And you know what, Ralph and Hal, what you're mentioning about the concussions, I think now in the NFL, just maybe it's this year, they have the so-called protocol. And they put them in the tent, and they check them out, and they're doing all that kind of stuff. Yet, on the other hand, I know that, and I'm a little bit partial, but Pete Savage, Tom Savage, who was the Texas quarterback, had played at Rutgers, Houston, right? He was hit, had a concussion problem at Rutgers. He's in the NFL, has a concussion problem. They still let him play in the game, and now, he's being criticized. Well, the fact is that the Texas Ball Club or somebody should have really jumped on that right away, because it is a severe problem. And, they can't, they can't downplay it because, there's been players, I think, Hal, you mentioned not too long ago, I think there's something like 90% of the players that have been deceased who they've checked their brain damage have found that there has been a problem with their brains because of the concussions.
Right.
Higher than that. It's higher than that.
In fact, the
Like
most recent
97.
case was one of the worst reported. I forget who had died. He was young. He was
Mike Webster, the Steelers center from the Dynasty.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Mike Webster. It was someone else who was more well known. I can't think of his name now, but he was about 26 or 27, and when his brain was examined, they found that he had so much evidence of dementia.
Oh, Aaron Hernandez.
Yes,
the one who's convicted of murder.
Right.
Committed suicide.
Yes. Yeah. Hernandez, right. Yeah. I mean, it's just tragic. It really is.
Early on, Al, when you first started doing these broadcasts, we talked about the possibility of the future. We're going to have like a flag football type thing.
I wouldn't be surprised.
You'll get to see the skills. Pardon me?
I wouldn't be surprised. But the problem with that, Ralph, people pay good money and they want to see collisions.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
I used to cover the Indianapolis 500. It's a great spectacle. 400,000 people in one place looking at the auto races. And you know what they're there for? They're there to watch the crashes and say to themselves, boy, thank God I wasn't in that car.
Yeah.
That's the human element. That's the human condition. And they pay to see the collisions. So
they pay to see the collisions in that, and they also pay to see the fights in hockey.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
The old joke, I went to a boxing match and a hockey game.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, no, I don't think flag football would make it. I think that's one of the reasons why in this day and age, baseball takes a second seat to the NFL.
Right. Well, one of the things that the disadvantages baseball has, and to some extent basketball and hockey, is their seasons are very long. Football, you play 16 regular season games. It's once a week. And baseball is a day in, day out. There's a book that came out a couple of years ago about the Washington Nationals called The Grind. I don't know if, David, you're aware of this one.
No, I've heard of it.
I read it. It's a fast read. It's a very short book about the season with Washington and how the players go through 162 games and playoffs. That's a day-by-day
and
grind.
Spring training games. Don't forget the spring training games.
Yeah,
it's over 200 games a year.
A lot bigger grind than football. So football is, it's a once-a-week deal. It's not like it's not like the other ones.
Well, look, they've started with 12 games
a season. It's like
season.
you're in a taxi cab accident once a week.
Well, the NFL started at 12 games a season. Then they went to 14 games a season. Now they're up to 16 games a season.
So they were playing, when they were playing 14 games, they were playing 6 exhibition games, which...
And I tell you something, the 4 exhibition games, that's another hook against the fan. If you have season tickets for any of the NFL games, you have to buy those preseason games too.
Yeah, I only refer to them as preseason. I call them exhibitions because
they are. They're totally meaningless.
And those are the games that they should let the ordinary fan who doesn't have a season ticket have the opportunity to go in and see a game. It's crazy that the season ticket holders are obligated to buy those tickets, and the average fan who might just love to see one game a year is blocked out. It's the way the NFL operates.
And they watch the returning veterans play one quarter at most. I mean, it's a way to look and see what's coming up, but to charge those crazy prices.
A lot of years ago I used to watch the exhibition games, and then I found out I was getting burned out by November. So I stopped watching. I don't watch 1 minute of any exhibition game now.
Right.
You know, it's interesting. Alan calls them exhibition games. At the AP, many years ago, we started to call them exhibition games. And we got an indignant call from the NFL saying, you can't call them exhibition games. We call them preseason games.
Right.
So they were very, very adamant about the title of these events. They're not exhibitions. They're preseason games.
It's like you see the car commercials of pre-owned cars, not used cars, but pre-owned cars.
Right. Hal, the question is,
orange juice also.
Hal, did
the
the AP
point. It's just changing the decimal point and letting the fan pick up the difference. That's all.
The question is, Hal, did the AP buckle and change the name of the games?
Yes, we started calling them preseason games.
Again,
we didn't want to make the NFL angry with us. We loved them.
Sure, of course not.
No? We didn't want them to be angry with us. They'd punish us.
No,
they would.
They'd probably send some 300-pound tackle up there to straighten us out.
They wouldn't let you in the locker room after the game, Hal.
That's right. Well, that's happened
tickets,
too, you know.
I had season tickets at Chase Stadium with the Jets in 1979 and 1980, and my experience there, I gave up the tickets after 1980 after they lost the home game to 0-14 New Orleans. And that cured me. I haven't been to a pro football game since.
I covered that game.
Yeah, that was unbelievable. I told this friend of mine who had the tickets with, they lose this one, that's it. Yeah.
Do you recall, Alan, there was like a black cloud.
Yeah, that was the day after John Lennon was shot.
Following New Orleans down the field as they scored the only touchdown of the game.
Yeah.
It was scary.
How may I
was that the game that Cassell, when John Lennon, you said John Lennon was killed, that he had to mention it, but he wasn't sure that was the right venue, so he didn't talk about it, and then I guess
I was there. I didn't know what the television coverage was. So
right.
Yeah.
Hal, may I ask you which sport is most accommodating to the press?
That's an interesting question. Accommodating to the press. Well, in my experience, baseball was because you could go into the locker room before a game, 3 hours before a game, and just hang out and talk to the players, and then you had options to get in there after the game. I know football, you're not allowed in the locker room before the game, so the access is more limited. I think basketball does allow you into the locker room before the game. I don't think hockey does. I mean, this has changed. I haven't been doing this for quite some time, but I do recall baseball the locker room being open 3.5 hours before a game, so you could go in there. But that's changed, I think, because the players weren't happy with that kind of access for the writers. So that may have in the last 2 or 3 years changed and become more limited. Something like when batting practice starts, the writers have to leave or something like that. But again, I haven't covered games in some time, and so I don't know exactly what the rules are anymore. But when I was working,
I was just going to ask, what do you miss about covering the games? But I want you to elaborate on what you were going to say first.
What I was saying is that when I was working, baseball was a wonderful sport to cover. I always enjoyed covering baseball. What I didn't enjoy was when games flipped in the ninth inning and I had to rewrite my lead. But that's another story for another day. No, I mean from the access and from the congeniality in the clubhouse, the ball players were for a wide margin. They were really decent guys. You could always get a bad apple here and there, but by and large, they were good guys, and it was fun to cover the baseball games. I loved it.
I'm going to rephrase my question.
What?
In retirement, when you watch sports, do you watch it with a different eye, or do you still have the jaundiced eye of a reporter?
I watch it almost as a technical eye. And I'll say to myself, gee, I'm surprised that they're playing it that way, that the defense is that aligned that way, that they're bringing that pitcher in that circumstance, that they're not using the hit and run or they're not stealing a base or whatever. It's technical stuff. I root for the Mets because I live here in New York, and I'm a National League fan. I don't like the designated hitter. I've never liked the Yankees, so I'm left with this sorry collection of New York Mets. And I, watch them, and I enjoy the games. I do. I enjoy the broadcasts. I enjoy the people who are working the broadcast. Keith Hernandez is a fascinating guy as far as I'm concerned, and Ron Darling also. They work the TV games, and I go upstairs at 7 o'clock every night and watch a game, and my wife sits downstairs and watches Law and Order or whatever she watches. So for me, baseball will always be number one.
Yeah, that's my evening entertainment too. Yep, I go down and watch.
She has better taste in programming than you do, and I say that.
Thank you. Thank you. She thinks so too.
And she's correct. Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. These have been harrowing years under the Wilpons. I thought of the question to ask David while you were talking about fandom. I've always disliked the Yankees, said you. Well, David's always loved the Yankees and wrote a book on Washington. And lives in Washington and roots for the Nats. What happens when the Nats come in, when the Yankees come in to play the Nats, David?
Oh, well, that happened about 2 seasons back or so. I went, and I rooted for the Yankees. I can't not root for the Yankees.
Okay.
I root for the Nats in the National League. So far, I haven't had to, be concerned about a Washington-New York World Series. But true Yankee. If I lived in Moose Jaw, Alaska, I'd still root for the Yankees. That's my team.
Yeah, the only time I ever rooted against the Yankees was in the 1960 World Series. And the odds of them.
And wasn't that something talking to Bill?
Ralph Perry the other night. Yeah, that was tremendous.
It was stolen from us. It was stolen.
And the moves the Pirates are making, they're going to be on a level. Yeah. If they're not already, they're going to level with the Mets, especially after yesterday.
Well, they're not through yet. I don't think they're through yet.
No, Harrison's the next one to go.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll take them off your hands, Alan. We could use it.
You may. The Mets are one of the teams.
Oh, that would be very nice.
So the Mets have a plus. They lost Granderson yesterday. That's a plus.
No, the Dodgers.
Well, he's been gone for a while.
He was with the Dodgers, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he went to Toronto. Yeah.
Yes.
Boy, he's one travel ball player. I tell you, I first saw him with Detroit, and I thought he was a hell of a good ball player. And
he was a good ball player with the Yankees too.
Yes,
he wasn't a good ball player with the Mets.
You asked me before about what sport I preferred to cover. He's a good example. You would go into that clubhouse. Granderson would be at his locker all the time. You could talk to him, win, lose, or draw, about anything and everything, and he was always congenial and pleasant. And, that's what we want. As a writer, you want somebody to talk to you. I had a human experience. Yeah, exactly. I had an experience with Livan Hernandez, the old pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
I had a story that I wanted to write, and I went up to his locker, and he was fiddling with his shoelaces or something, and he wouldn't talk to me. And I said to myself, he's going to have to talk to me. I am not going to leave here without this story. And I stood there, and he stood there, and we stared each other down for a while. And finally he said, well, what do you want? And I said, just answer a couple of questions. And I asked him the questions I had, and that was the end of it. But he was an unpleasant so-and-so, and, there are guys like that in everywhere, in all walks of life, and baseball is no different. And I'm sure football and basketball and hockey are no different.
Hal, did you ever have to deal with Barry Bonds?
No. I never had any...
I heard he was a real piece of work, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that from other people, but I never had anything to do with him.
Well, I'll tell you a story about, remember Joaquin Andujar, the St. Louis Cardinals pitcher?
One of the great quotes of all time. Do you know the great Joaquin Andujar quote?
No.
I'll tell you what it was. In the World Series between Kansas City and St. Louis, I guess it was 1980 or thereabouts.
85. 1985.
That's right, 85. Yeah. Joaquin Andujar was going to start the third game of the World Series, and they had a press conference in the bowels of Busch Stadium, and Andujar was on the, Andujar was not his English was not his native tongue, and so somebody asked him about whatever, and Andujar said, you can sum up baseball in one word: you never know. That was his one word: you never know. So that was I'm sorry I interrupted you, Dave.
No, that's fine. That's a great story. I was down in the Dominican Republic. I was working on a story for Islands magazine about baseball in the Dominican Republic, and we were going. A photographer, a friend of mine, and I were going around the island. It was during the winter baseball season down there. And I let it be known that I would like to interview Andor. And they said, well, okay, we'll track him down. He's a little crazy. They all admitted he was a little nuts.
He was.
And I get these reactions back. Well, yeah, he might talk to you tomorrow. And tomorrow would come. No, he's not ready tomorrow. The next day. Well, he lived out, I forget, near St. Pedro de Macorís, I think it was. Anyway, just about the next to last day that we're there, they said, okay, he'll talk to you today. And so we rushed out to this house that he had built for himself. And, he didn't invite us in or anything. He just came to the front gate. And he talked to us for a few minutes, and he was very nonplussed. He didn't. There was no emotion. I know English wasn't his first language, but we didn't ask him any tricky questions. And he just left. He just walked back into the house, just like that. I later learned that this was a house he had built for himself and his family, and I don't know how much he spent on it, but anyway. He decided he didn't like it, and he had the whole thing torn down, a brand new house, and he had a new one built in its place. And they all, everybody I spoke to across the island, our country there, it was crazy, but maybe he'll talk to you.
Crazy. Well, here, I'll tell you another Levon Hernandez story. The year before I had this episode with this stare down with him, he was pitching for the Mets. Now, I'm in the clubhouse. It's right before the All-Star break. And if any of you have ever seen baseball players right before the All-Star break, boy, they're packing their bags. They want to go home. They've had a half a season, and they want to go home for 3 days. So they were all packing up. And this was at a time when Barack Obama was the president, and he had sort of warmed relations with Cuba. And it seemed like the travel restrictions were going to be lifted. And I went up to Hernandez in the Mets clubhouse, and I said, you look around here, and all these guys are packing to go home. Do you think about going back to Cuba one day now that the president has eased the travel restrictions? And he was very emotional and very quiet and very nice and very good. I mean, really good stuff to bring tears to your eyes, right? A year later, I had this episode with him in the Braves clubhouse, and I said to him, did you ever get back to Cuba? He looked at me like I was crazy. He said, why would I want to do that? I said, you told me last year that was your dream, to go home to Cuba. I never said that. Am I nuts? I mean, I got the same notebook here, So go figure these guys out. I can't,
Well, illustrious president will deny what he said 5 minutes ago, so.
Well, that's an old story, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's no way to end a show, Al Blumpkin.
I know, yeah. Let me one last comment about Gruden in the 10 years. In the early 1960s, the Eagles used to change ownership like every other week. And this one owner bought them, and he signed Joe Q. Harrick to a 15-year contract to coach them. Joe Q. Harrick at the time his big claim to fame was having the only record in Notre Dame history as a coach. And after 2 years or so, they started to get really, really bad. And one of my friends who had tickets there at the time said they were taking up a collection in the, I guess it was in the JFK Stadium or Franklin Field, because they still weren't, the vet wasn't around back then, to buy out they took up a collection in the stands to buy his contract out. And then the team got sold again and he was fired. So I'm sure he collected for, like 11, 12 years out of the 15 that he had signed for. Contracts that long, I think are really, really, dumb on management's part, but, who am I?
Well, what was it, Whitey Herzog, who, when he was offered a lifetime contract from Bush, he asked him, "Whose lifetime, mine or yours?"
Yeah, sadly, he died young too, Whitey Herzog.
No, he's
still alive.
Oh, he is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah.
Whitey Ashburn has passed, and he did die young.
Richie Ashburn. Yeah.
Richie Ashburn was 70 when he passed.
Yeah, he was called Whitey by his partner, Barry Callis. He always referred to Richie Ashburn as Whitey.
Well, did your dad have a nickname, George?
Not that I know of. They used to call him Casey, but that was almost his last name. I know Ted Williams used to call him Casey, and probably that's the one name that I've heard certain players or friends of my dad mention his name, Casey. And actually that was the nickname they gave me too when I was a youngster. They called me Casey. So that's the only nickname that I remember.
All right. Hey, gentlemen, this has been another terrific show. I'm very appreciative.
Thank you.
All right.
Always enjoy these conversations. They're great.
Yeah, this is terrific. Thank you, one and all. And I want to implore our audii, if you enjoy this or any of our offerings, please box up some lightly used children's books and take them to the Head Start program in whatever community you live. Kids need to read, they need to develop a passion, and they need to get school ready, become school ready, as well as taking their noses out of the devices and the games. So help society. Kids are our future. They're certainly our present. Their parents are wasted. 48% of them voted for Trump. So at least let's the kids have a blank slate. Let's keep it going through them. And we'll be back next week, same time. Alan, say it.
The same bad time, same bad channel.
Beautiful. Thank you, gentlemen. And drive carefully, everybody out there. We'll be back.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night, all.